Welcome, everybody. It is somewhat unusual to begin one of our meetings with an opening statement by the chair rather than usual welcome. These are, however, not usual times, and I believe I would be remiss if I did not address the current situation directly, as it has direct impacts on the internet, our colleagues, and our own way forward. First, I'm humbled by the work of the women and men of Ukraine who have labored to keep their people connected to the internet despite savage bombardment and relentless attack. Their success has been remarkable, earning them their government's recognition as invisible heroes. The internet's roll of honor has many luminaries, but few deserve their place upon it so much as they do, despite the fact that we may never know their names. Second, my heart goes out to the members of the Internet Society chapter in Ukraine. When they joined the Internet Society community in October of last year, it was with the aim that we would work together to grow, mobilize, and engage our communities to build, promote, and defend an internet for everyone. We understand that their members, including their president, Yuri Karkapoplov, vice president Roman Perun, secretary Tatiana Kazarian, and treasurer Katarina Tanashchuk will necessarily have other priorities now. But I look forward to the day when we can take up the work together again. Lastly, I feel the need to respond to those who have called for a partition of the internet in response to the crisis. The Internet Society's guiding principle has for decades been that the internet is for everyone. In this crisis, the need for that focus has never been more clear. In the run-up to the invasion, the internet shared photographic evidence of the buildup and exposed empty promises of de-escalation. After the invasion, it has carried the heartbreaking images of the common people of Ukraine under attack and the stirring images of their response. It has carried the voice of President Zelensky across the globe to parliament after parliament, and it has coordinated the work of those helping refugees find shelter, find community, and find each other. From within Russia, it has carried the voices and images of those who have strenuously objected to the actions of their government. The brave actions of Marina Ovsyannikova were carried out on a live TV broadcast, but without the internet's ability to amplify her protest, it would have been lost in an instant. Similar actions by those documenting protests and responses have shown the world that many of the people of Russia want no part of war. Partitioning the internet closes off that traffic and loses us the opportunity to hear common voices. It is tempting in a moment of crisis to close off anything that you can as a demonstrate that you have done something. But this action empowers those who want the world to act in darkness and feeds the endless hunger of autocracy for control. Simply put, partition hands control to those who want their people to have no independent vision of current events or independent access to other voices. It will not silence governments. It will silence everyone else. It is tempting as night falls to draw in and huddle in the darkness, but this is a moment for beacons and candlelight, for hearth fires and searchlights. We must keep the internet whole to enable individuals to share with each other. We must enable the internet for everyone so the light of humanity and fire of truth can win out over the darkness. My thanks to Andrew and to the staff who have made Defend the Internet a core mission of the Society. My thanks to each of our members for their efforts as well. While some have called for the Internet Society to stand as a neutral provider of information, I believe we should be inspired by those unknown colleagues who have kept Ukraine connected. We should defend what we can and rebuild what we must. We can then hand on this gift to the next generation whole and with a reaffirmed conviction that the internet is for everyone. Among those joining us as stewards of the Internet Society's mission today are 2 new chapters, 5 new special interest groups, and 3 new standing groups. And now I'd like to turn to the happy duty of welcoming them. So the purpose of this section of the thing is to recognize the different ISOC chapters, special interest groups, and standing groups which have been approved since the last meeting of the board. The first is a resolution to recognize the New Internet Society of Romania and the New Internet Society of Suriname. May I ask for someone to move the motion, please?
So moved.
So I saw John and Luis. I'd like to do this by acclamation. So if you would clap either through the tool or directly to do that. Welcome indeed. The next resolution is for new special interest groups. That's the interest groups for affordable internet access, cybersecurity, internet for education, the Internet of Things, and online safety. May I ask someone to move this motion, please?
So moved.
So I saw Laura and Pepper. And again, I'd like to do this by acclamation. The third is to welcome the new standing groups. The Internet Society warmly welcomes the new standing groups for accessibility, gender, and youth. Mohammed, since you have been a key part of building up at least one of these groups, may I ask that you move this? Thank you, Mohammed. And may I ask for a second, please? I saw Richard. And again, we'd like to do that by acclamation. We're certainly happy to see the growth in the society, and in the growth in the different parts of it coming together and working together is always a pleasant thing to see. The next item on our agenda is the receipt of community reports, and the first of those is with our colleague Glenn Dean.
He should be joining momentarily. There he is.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Glenn.
Good? Too low, too high?
You're good.
Okay.
Good.
Kevin, are you going to run the slides or
Yes, I can do that.
Hi, everybody. I'm Glenn Dean from the Internet or IETF Trusts. Can't remember which group I'm talking to. Good morning, wherever you are. Can you bring up the slides, please, Kevin? So this is a brief update of what the IHF Trust has been up to. Next slide, please. So the IHF Trusts are these 5 individuals, one of which is in fact appointed by yourselves. Currently, John Levine holds that position. But there's myself, I'm the chair. Kathy Moriarty is the treasurer. Joel Halpern, John Levine, and Stephen Wenger are the other trustees. Rounding out, we got 5 of us that keep the trust up and running. Next slide, please. So a lot of people aren't really familiar with what the trust actually does. Some people are very familiar because they themselves have been trustees in the past, but others are less familiar with what the trust does. And that's actually a good thing, because the trust deals mostly with legal things, licensing issues, trademark management, and protection of these things. And when you don't hear from the trust, life is good because it's very calm and quiet, and we're not dealing with anything that needs dealing with. And so when you don't hear from us, that's the very best situation to be in. But when we do take care of business, we are responsible to a variety of parties. The IETF, obviously, it's in our name. It's where we were born from to take care of things like RFCs and copyrights there. But that expanded also into IANA and ICANN and the RAR community when the transition happened a few years ago, and the IHF Trust took on functions for all those parties to help protect those assets. So we manage domains, and what we mean by manage is we make sure that nobody else, re-registers these domains and takes off with them. We make sure the changes that are approved and requested by the parties that actually run the domains get a second set of eyes to review them for changes, so that we don't get any hijackings going on. We also take care of copyrights. Now, the mission of the IETF Trust's IP materials are really to make them accessible and easy to use by everybody. So when we say we have copyrights we manage, what we really mean is we do protect those copyrights. We make sure that they're not lost through either some mismanagement and non-compliance with legal frameworks in the countries that we have to manage in, or by somebody doing something which they shouldn't be doing, such as a great example would be taking an RFC. We give an open license for anybody who wants to take an RFC, the entire RFC, and publish it, in however they like to do that. But we don't let them take subsections of the RFC and say, for instance, grab a few paragraphs and stick that into something else. That breaks up the copyright regime that we have to manage and that we protect. And lastly, we have these other two things which are smaller in our portfolio: the trademarks and the software. Trademarks, you got to protect them. If you don't defend them, if you let them become generic or let other people misuse them, you can lose them. So we also take a very serious approach to making sure that none of the marks we manage for the community are mismanaged, and that we retain a full freedom of action around the trademarks. Next slide, please. And this is kind of really boring information, but it's going to come up in a few slides as to why it's important. Currently, the trust is a trust in the Commonwealth of Virginia. It's an IRS nonprofit. We also don't make any money from all these things we manage. So it's very appropriate that we're a nonprofit, because we don't have any profit. We're independent of both ISOC and the IETF LLC. We are a separate legal entity. We have our own website right there. We talked about the 5 trustees. And the trustees, it's not a requirement that you be focused on IP law and knowledge around that space, but it's very useful. And we're a small budget. We're about $100,000, and most of that actually goes towards legal fees for our various advisors. But we also pay for insurance, and that'll come up in a minute. And if you've ever been to an IETF meeting, and all those blue sheets get collected, if you ever wonder where they go, we pay for the storage of those blue sheets in a cabinet. So the ones that aren't digitized. Next slide, please. So one of the important things I wanted to talk to you today, and we started out talking to the ITF, their plenary this past week, is that there's a couple of problems that the trust is starting to face. Some of them we've been facing for a few years. We hoped it would get better, but it's not. The first of which is our insurance coverage. Because we're a trust, there is a peculiarity where the trustees themselves are not just officers of the trust, they're literally the owners of the trust. That's sort of the nature of a trust in US law. And the net result of that is, that there's a lot of liability we all carry by being trustees. And to help offset some of that liability, we do carry, and I know ISOC carries for yourselves as well, robust insurance to help offset the liability risk that we all take on. The problem the trust has been facing the last few years is because we're a trust and not another kind of legal entity. Insurance companies have been unwilling to either extend the amount of insurance we cover in order to keep pace with inflation and pace with rising risks to the trustees. But they've also, we've seen a decrease in the number of companies who actually even provide insurance to the trust market. And part of this is because most of the time in the US, trusts aren't used in the way the IETF trust was set up. They tend to be more focused on managing real estate for families, or wealth, generational wealth management, or tax optimization. And for these reasons, the insurance industry has looked at trusts and said, wow, you guys are very high risk as a category, because you end up, you get sued by other family members and other parties quite a lot. We don't want to be in that business. And so they backed away from providing insurance into that marketplace. And so we've, last few years, tried to increase our limits or switch to another company, and we've been unable to. So we're starting to look at that landscape. Well, how do we fix this? Obviously, it's unacceptable to lower our insurance, and we run the risk, by the way, because the marketplace has gotten so small. We run the risk that the current insurance provider could decide to stop providing us insurance, and the trust would then be left operating without any insurance at all, and that is an unacceptable situation. Next slide, please. Related to this is the trustee's personal liability. So when you become a trustee, one of the things you get to do is you sign an agreement. And I will tell you, the advice was passed to me, and I've passed it on to other people. This is one agreement you definitely want to read. This isn't just like, sure, I'll be a trustee type agreement. You're taking a lot of personal liability and risk on when you become a trustee, because we own the trust and the assets around it. If the trust were to get sued, it isn't that you're suing some abstract entity, you're literally also suing the trustees themselves. So that's a real problem. And we have, in discussions with members in the community, a number of people have actually identified that they won't be a trustee because they won't take on that personal liability risk that comes with that job. And so that creates a real problem for us. We can't procure more insurance to cover people. We have people that are now saying, I'm not really comfortable being a trustee with the risks that I have to take on. And so we've been looking at what are our options going forward to improve the situation. And we've observed that corporations, not for-profit corporations, their directors have a lot of protections under the law and significantly reduced liability. Plus, they're able to get insurance because insurance companies recognize such entities and they understand the risk liability around providing insurance to them, and it's a much easier marketplace. So next slide, please. So if we are considering making some changes to the structure of the trust, possibly becoming a not-for-profit corporation, one of the questions that first comes up from a lot of people is, well, why not just fold under the IETF LLC? We created this over at the IETF a couple of years ago. We put a lot of work into it. It's a well-run organization. And why not just fold all these assets underneath there and be done with it? And this is very common of other standards organizations. They wouldn't have a separate entity that managed their IP rights. Now, I'll point out that the IP rights we manage go beyond the IETF because of the IANA transition. So it isn't just the IETF community we're talking about anymore. But for this particular question, there are two really important things in the history of the trust that we have to focus in on. The first one was the actual agreement that created the trust in 2005. When that agreement was set up, it was set up and signed by CNRI and ISOC, who at the time each had pieces of what would become the trust asset base. And in that agreement, there is a specific requirement that upon dissolution of the trust, neither party is able to inherit the assets from the trust. So if we were in fact to fold the trust under the LLC, one of the things we have to pay attention to is the fact that the LLC in fact is a disregarded entity of ISOC. And so we would then be putting the trust assets closer to ISOC ownership, possibly even considered to be direct ownership. And this would be in violation of that original trust agreement. And some people point out, well, the trustees could sort of, because we have the power of the trustees, we could alter the rules that agreement are set under. The trustees have discussed this, and we're not comfortable doing that. We do not believe that that is the intent of the spirit of the original agreement or the intent of the community at the current moment. A related problem is that when the IANA transition was done in 2016, and IANA assets were transferred to the IHF Trust for management, a big reason, and some of the people on this call were in fact involved in the negotiation, so you know even better than I, the trust was selected as a neutral third party for a lot of these assets, and that people could sort of say, I don't want you to have it, I don't want you to have it, but these other guys, they're okay to have. They're a neutral third party. If we were to fold under LLC, IANA assets would ultimately then end up under ISOC as well, and ISOC itself, through PIR, is a registry operator. And that's also getting a little bit crossing the wires. So looking at these two things, the trustees do not believe that folding under the IETF LLC is in fact the right way to respect these agreements or the right way to move forward. So next slide, please. So what are we doing? Well, we've been exploring what it would take, how much it would cost, and is it even possible to convert the trust's legal registration from a trust to a not-for-profit corporation. And our advisors say, yes, this is something that can be done. It's not a trivial thing. It requires some work. It requires creating a new not-for-profit corporation. It would be registered in Delaware. It requires creating a set of foundational documents that would establish the bylaws for the new entity. And we have taken the step of actually working with our consulting attorneys to create a draft set of such bylaws to see what they would look like and what we would have to change. And so after having done that, what we've discovered is the following. It is possible to transfer all the IETF Trust assets to that new entity. All the current licenses as they currently stand would also be able to be transferred without modification. Now, one big change is that the trustees would no longer be owners of these assets. They would be demoted to only becoming directors. And I can speak for all 5 trustees. We're quite happy and quite comfortable getting the demotion to only a director from the current owner of these assets. We would be very happy for this to happen. And the other change we would like to do is move it from Virginia, where the trust was originally set up today, over to Delaware. And this is because, just like the IETF LLC and many other corporations, Delaware is a good state to incorporate in under US law. And it also establishes us as going back to the insurance companies as something they would recognize and understand how to work with and how to provide proper insurance coverage for. Things that would stay the same. The role and the service that the IETF Trust provides to the IETF internet communities, the whole everybody, would stay exactly the same. That will not change. The IP licenses will remain the same. We're not trying to become turn these things into a for-profit set of assets. They're just going to stay the same and transfer over. And the same spirit that the trust is always operating under of making these things easy to use without payment, free use, is something we will continue to do. It would stay a nonprofit. Part of the exercise here is to create the corporation and then register it with the IRS to become a 501c3 nonprofit. So part of the timeline, if we do this transfer, would in fact be to set up the corporation, apply for 501c3 status. And once that has come through, then begin the work of transferring the assets over. So this is not a fast thing. This will probably take at least a year. And the selection of directors would follow the same spirit and process as RFC 8714, which lays out how the trustees today are selected. We're not trying to change that. That's working just fine. We haven't had anybody in the community say we need to alter the selection process to create more directors, fewer directors, or directors from different places. That's all going to stay the same. So in the end, really, it's a registration. It's sort of almost a legal paper change, but the actual function, role, purpose of the trust all stays the same. And we're also working hopefully to keep the name. It turns out we've applied for and explored, will we be allowed to keep the name? And so far it looks like we will, but it's tricky because if we become a corporation and you call yourself a trust, what does that mean? So we're asking for, because we've been using that term since 2005 and have it well established, we've asked for permission from the state of Delaware. If we were to create this corporation, could we keep the name? Next slide, please. We're not going to do this in isolation, though. And so the discussion we presented to the IETF at the plenary this past week, the talk today, are sort of the opening rounds of consulting with the broader community on what our plans are and what we're going to do. And so the next stage of this is we plan to, in April, to have a webinar where we basically will open up and say, here's what we're planning to do. We'll talk about the reasons behind it. We'll talk about the details, and we will invite people to comment and participate in the discussion. We're also going to use the TLP interest list over at the IETF for an anchor point for the conversation. We debated creating a new list. This one's been established in the past for discussing IETF trust related activities. So we thought, let's just keep it there and keep it simple. So we're going to use the TLP interest list. And that's it. Next slide is just our contact information and discussion, questions, comments.
Well, first, thanks very much for including us in the consultation and for your report today. We really appreciate your time. And now, are there any other questions to Glenn?
Yeah, Glenn, sorry, this is John, and I'm running around at the moment. Has there been any discussion of the implications? Is there like a change in the implications of it being a US company that owns this, that the corporation will become versus the trust?
We did explore the question of, well, does it make sense to keep in the US, or would this be an opportunity to do something else? Because that question does come up a lot in these internet matters. The trick right now is these assets are in fact US-based assets, and to both dissolve the trust, transfer the assets, and do it internationally would add a significant complication to how we do this exercise. We also, by the way, I know a lot of people don't like US copyright law on the internet, but I will point out that it is actually a pretty easy system to navigate and well known. If you own the copyright materials, which we do, and we want to provide them with easy access to the people around the world, the US system is actually a pretty good system to do that under.
Okay, yeah,
Thank you.
but there hasn't been any pushback you received from people that would be concerned about it being, in particular, a US corporation, especially for the NTIA transition component of it.
No, and I'll point out we are currently a US-based trust. So
Yep. I just didn't know if it was like different that it's a company.
right. No, so far no pushback. Again, the trust is pretty boring, and a lot of people don't get too excited about it because we don't have much money, we don't have a lot of power. We just make stuff available for people to use easily.
Laura?
Okay, thanks.
I want to ask about, I think there are other folks have questions about like why to do this, but I have a question about the cost of doing this. If we were to convert, like how many zeros is that going to have after it?
Not many. I mean, not zero zeros. We estimate the total cost might come in around $20,000. And most of that, frankly, is spent in crafting things like the bylaws and lawyer time to do that write-up, and then lawyers to do the process of actually filing the corporation's papers, and then applying for the nonprofit 501c3 status. So we've already spent a little bit of that money. We had a special fund that we tapped earlier this year to pay for the upfront costs to do the analysis. And then the remaining funds would be used for the remainder. So total, maybe $20,000 or so is our estimate, maybe 25 on the outside.
Now that there'd probably also be a cost for, rebranding, community communications and all those kinds of things. So don't discount that. And I'm also interested in like the ongoing costs. So let's make sure we document that too, like what difference.
Yeah, so we don't anticipate any change to the ongoing costs, really. The only real change might be that since we would be able to buy proper insurance, the amount of insurance we buy hopefully would go up, and that cost may go up. On the other hand, because the basis of trusts obtaining insurance already is a highly risky endeavor, we pay a fair amount of money for the coverage we currently get. As a corporation, it's very likely that may stay the same or even go down to get more coverage.
Okay, I will go to, I think Richard had a question.
By the way, we're very lean. We have no full-time staff. We have 5 trustees, and we have a sliver of some people from AMS that help us keep everything rolling under the covers. Like I said, most of our money actually goes to lawyers that we have a retainer.
Would we need staff if we moved over? Like, would we need at least one full-time?
I don't think so. Again, we're not changing what the trust does or its function. We're really only changing how it's registered as an entity.
Richard?
I'd just like to, just for folks' background, to kind of clarify what the relationship is between ISOC and the trust. The trust, Glenn, correct me if I'm wrong here, the trust, I believe, is an independent entity. It's not legally formally connected to ISOC at this point. It's just that we have some history together and we've traditionally provided funding. Is that right?
Yes. So when the trust was created, I wasn't around doing the negotiations. I suspect we have the history of some people in the room may be more familiar. So forgive me if I get some of it wrong, because I'm getting it secondhand because I wasn't there. But back in 2005, CNRI had ownership or claim ownership around a set of the assets that were now under the trust management. Likewise, ISOC also claimed and owned some of the assets that were under the trust management. And the two parties came together and said, well, how do we, keep this going forward with neither one of us actually ever taking over ownership and control of this new thing? And so this independent entity was created. And the original signees of the creation were in fact ISOC and CNRI. And they then came together, the first trustees were appointed, and it's operated that way since 2005. At the time, there was also a restriction for 10 years that the trustees themselves could not make changes to that agreement. That ultimately expired in 2015, and that period went over. So that's part of the reason we think that keeping this as an independent entity is the right thing to do. It avoids a lot of complications that would come from joining up. And by the way, since the trust was created and those original assets came in, we've taken on a lot of new assets. So we've taken on, people have transferred old RFCs that they owned from way back in the early days are now transferred over to the trust. And so we've expanded what we manage on behalf of the community. So it's very complicated, and keeping it separate, we think, is the very simplest path forward. It may get much more expensive if we try to do something else.
Thanks for that background. Have you had conversations with some of the other stakeholders here? For instance, the IANA folks about the various options here?
We have not. Again, this is the start of the consultation, so we just sort of unfurled the banner last Wednesday to the IETF. We're talking to you today. We are going to be reaching out to the RARs and the IANA ICANN community to let them know of this proposal and hopefully have good conversations. We're not trying to rush this through, by the way, right? So we've done the prep work to know what it would look like, get a sense of the costs and the steps, but we're not trying to rush this. Even if we said today, everybody said, go ahead and do it. We expect it's at least a year because we have to create the entity and then apply for 501c3 status, because what you don't want to do is create the entity, transfer a bunch of assets over to it, not get the 501c3 status, and then go, oh gosh, we now have this other entity which owns all these assets, but it's not a not-for-profit. What do we do with those assets and how do we transfer them back? We don't want to go there. So it'll be methodical, slow, well thought out, and hopefully really simple when we get all done.
Well, thanks again for letting us know where you are in the process right now, and we will look forward to getting the invitation to the webinar when you have same. And those of us who are concerned with it will no doubt continue to be part of the process. I think in the meantime, though, our action item is to continue to provide a designated member of the trust when that's needed, and to continue to support the trust as appropriate, and to watch the evolution. So again, since we're not actually interlocked organizations at this point, it's a bit at one remove.
Sounds good, Ted. Thank you for the invite to come talk to you, and I look forward to doing it sometime again.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask that we do a quick agenda bash at this point. There are a couple of committee reports that actually require resolutions. And because Laura has promised to go and teach 40 young women to a scout troop, she might or might not be able to stick with us through the discussion of some of the community reports. So let's take the committee reports now so that you can be here for those. And then since the community reports are more of a free-flowing discussion, we can do those and go on from there. So I think the first one of those, could we do the PIR NOMCOM, Richard?
Sure. Kevin, you pull the report up. Sorry, this just got this in at the last minute, but I think you're pretty much all aware of what's in the report. So we opened our call for nominations in November after having had some good discussions with the PIR board about what they were looking, in addition to what the ISOC board was looking for. Got several, a very strong candidate pool with fairly robust diversity along both geographical, gender, professional experience sort of axes. And I was pleased to see when I ran the numbers that kind of persisted through the interview process. So we ended up, interviewing a fairly diverse set of candidates and then selecting a fairly diverse set of candidates. And so we're pleased to announce, as the board has already voted on by e-vote, the appointment of Lena Beck-Vervig, Keith Davidson, and Mike Silber to the PIR Board of Trustees. That was approved by e-vote on March 17th, a few weeks ago. And so, yeah, I think there we are. So I think they will start at the summer board meeting and we'll be off to the races. Thanks to the committee for your participation in this. This was a lot of fun going through this process. Thanks to the board for your consideration and your input on these nominees as we went through. That's all I have, I think.
Thanks very much. Are there questions for Richard before we move on to the resolution? Okay, I didn't see any questions. So the resolution is fairly simple, accepting the committee's report. May I ask for a motion, please?
So moved.
So Richard and then Laura. Can you signify assent by raising your hand either in the tool or via?
To be clear, I'm not trying to vote twice.
Okay, I think that's everyone who voted yes. Mohammed, did you mean to vote? Okay, so we'll assume not in this case and move on. The next one is the Compensation Committee report. Would you mind putting that up, please, Kevin? Gosh, what a lovely selection of fonts I put in there. This is a yearly report that describes the work of the committee to approve the variable compensation and therefore the overall compensation of the folks in the Internet Society who are disqualified persons, which, as Luis and I looked up earlier today, essentially means that from a tax perspective, because they have sufficient control over some aspect of the society's finances or activities, that they're considered by the tax folks to be in a category that means we should pay close attention to them. And Ilona, I see your hand up to correct my extremely, how shall I put it, loose definition with a correct one. Ilona.
And actually, this wasn't about correcting, but just quick question to ask if you can ask about conflicts.
Oh, yes, sorry.
No, it's okay, thank you.
No, actually, this is a great one. Before we get to this one, I should have earlier asked if there was anybody who had any conflicts of interest to declare for this meeting. Okay, seeing none, we will call that no conflicts of interest declared. My apologies, Ilona. Yes, you did remind me of this, and I should have done it earlier. Anyway, for the compensation committee, that meant that we reviewed Andrew's total compensation, including his variable compensation, and then reviewed his evaluation and conducted some additional evaluation of those who are listed here: Sally Wentworth, Renalia Abdul Rahim, Say Park, and Ilona Levine. Lastly, it approved the proposed 2022 performance objectives, both for the CEO and for the disqualified persons. Are there any questions about the committee's report? Okay, so there's again a simple resolution for this one, which is just to accept the committee's report. May I ask for someone to move it? I saw Pepper and John, so we'll have Pepper as move and John as second. And if you could signify assent to the this by raising your hand either personally or in the tool, I would appreciate that. Okay, we have enough to declare that it has passed. The third of these is not going to require a resolution, but why don't we take it at this moment? And that's from Brian, and it's the ongoing report from the CEO Succession Committee. So this work is still ongoing. And I will just characterize it myself, since I happen to be on the committee, that it's taken the success profile and has tried to turn it into a set of profiles that relate to different categories. And the reason for that is there's an increasing sense from the committee that there may in fact be more than one job here in the future, that we may have a CEO who needs an additional executive supporting her or him to carry out the full set of duties. So we wanted to lay out the full set of duties and characterize them into clusters so that those clusters could then be evaluated That is not done, and therefore this is an interim report, and it won't be. There'll be no request for an acceptance for it and no resolution, probably until the AGM. Obviously, Brian isn't here, but if there are any questions that the other committee members on this might respond to, please let us know now. Okay, thank you. Let's return to the agenda and pick up, I believe, with the written reports that we received from different parts of the committee. So we received a number of them in writing from the IAB chair, the IETF chair, the OMAC, and one in particular I wanted to call out because the OMAC report had advice for the board. So Kevin, could I ask you to pull that one up? Thanks very much. So in addition to reporting some of the great work that they've been doing in holding roundtables and otherwise engaging with the community, there's a set of advice to the board that we probably want to take note of and possibly discuss. So the Internet Society's Action Plan 2022 projects could further seek organization members' views and inputs. I think that's probably advice for Andrew. This approach could help the Internet Society and organization members develop new ways for organization members to become more active in supporting the deliverables, and that the Society's timely reactions to Internet policy proposals that could impact the ecosystem are very welcomed by their organization members, and those are an opportunity for continued engagement. So I'd like to open the floor for discussion of these points from the OMAC. Okay, I will just say that I think one of the things that we struggle with kind of consistently is how to act as a society where we bring all of the different parts of the society to act together. And while this particular set of advice to the board is a small piece of that puzzle, I think it's important to note that I see that as them also saying we would like to act together. We would like to be part of the overall society. And what I think we're looking for as a general thing, not just for these particular action items, but as a general thing is for more ways in which we can bring the actions of the different parts of the society together to move forward. And I think the policy engagements that they asked for are certainly something which Andrew and his team have done a great job in putting together. And knowing that those are of interest to OMAC and working with them after they have been released so that they can help amplify them would be something that might help us there. And I see, Luis, you had a comment there.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I also perceived in this recommendation, sorry, in these recommendations, some sense of dissociation with the rest of ISOC. Yes, I have been at some roundtables of OMAC, and I'm very satisfied of the work they are doing and the way they are discussing their involvement with ISOC. But when I read these recommendations, I feel that they do not feel integrated into the rest of the organization. And I was wondering yesterday that maybe we can propose to them to study the way to support the chapters in developing new projects, because OMAC members, they have a lot of experience on developing internet projects, internet related projects. So maybe chapters can use this experience in developing new proposals, and OMAC members that wish to participate can provide guidance or simply ideas to their new proposals. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other thoughts on this topic? Okay, let's move on. I did want to call out one thing from the IETF LLC's report. It's on page 13 of that report, if you wouldn't mind, Kevin. Yeah, so we discussed this a little bit earlier in terms of their endowment and our pledge to the endowment. And I just wanted to call out a couple of things from that. One, that they were able to raise $239,000, which will fall under the match that we've set aside for that. The second is there is actually now Director of Development, Lee Berkeley Shaw, at the staff of IETF.org, whose primary role is to actually look for ways in which the endowment can be made to grow. They do have a pretty aggressive target here. As you can see, their goal is to try and get this to 50 million by 2027. So I just wanted to put that up as a reminder to everybody that they have a relatively small start in this year with 239,000, but a very big goal, and that the impact on our funds of maintaining the match may go up substantially from this year in future years. That came up during Say's report earlier, but I thought it might be good to just go directly to the report and show that. Any other points on that particular report, on the IETF LLC report? The other thing that would be possibly good, Kevin, if you could bring up the IETF Chairs report and show the slide that shows participation, which is this, I think it's, oh no, yeah, thanks. So actually, I think if you go down, there's a graphic of the, okay, it must be in one of the ones that's linked off of here. But what's interesting about this that I was going to call out, which was, I guess, in the linked one on the agenda, is that the actual number of people participating in this IETF was remarkably consistent with other IETFs held in Europe in the past at the same time. What was very different, of course, was that this was a hybrid meeting with about 300 or so on-site participants and a much larger number of folks participating from off venue. And what's interesting about that is that this may mean, if this is sort of the pattern that goes forward, a pretty serious difference in how the IETF needs to think about how it collects funds. Because this was one of the first, thank you very much for pulling that up. This is not the same one I was thinking of, but it actually has the same information. So not quite such pretty graphics, but don't worry about the graphics. The interesting information for this is that if this is consistent, and I think this is a little bit older than the one I was looking at, we will see a serious change in how the IETF has to collect its own funds. Historically, remote registrations were all free because there were a relatively small number, and on-site registrations not only paid for the on-site activities, but were usually collected at a rate that would help defray the costs of the Secretariat, along with the donations from ISOC and others. In this case, the move to collecting for hybrid registrations, and instead of simply making those all free, having fee waivers for those who required them, is a substantial change in how they're managing their money. And I think if we see this trend of them being hybrid meetings maintained, I think it's useful for us to understand that they are thinking about how to manage the income that's specifically associated with meetings and the meeting costs in this way. Any questions on this? Any, Luis?
Someone, okay. So so what do you think that if there should be a cap on waivers, or waivers still must be considered in the same way that had happened in the past?
So at least for the past few, the waivers have been covered by specific donations, and the donations have been to help encourage diversity. So there's a diversity and inclusion program that's maintained by the IETF for donors. And providing these waivers is a way to increase the diversity, because they're making sure that you don't have to be sponsored by a company or from an economy for which this is not a huge amount of money in order to participate. So at the moment, at least, specific donations are covering them. It might be that that would change in the future, but at least for the moment, there's no sign of needing a cap.
Okay, because for example, Gaia, which is Global Access Internet for All, usually is comprised by people that have no sponsorship, neither by a company, neither by a grant, because it is not part of the granting activities. So essentially the participation relies a lot on waivers. So we will appreciate a lot if that can continue. Thank you.
Okay, Paul.
Yeah, just another in the, I suspect we're going to need to keep watch on this, because remote participation, I think, is going to become more prevalent even post-decided COVID. There are way too many companies that were looking at their travel budgets and spending tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars that didn't for a couple of years. And recovering those travel funds is going to be interesting. So I think this is going to be a continuum for a while. So I think that charging for remote to buffer it is probably a prudent move.
Thanks for that point. John, you have brought a pet to the meeting. You must introduce the pet.
This is Kitune. He's just looking for somewhere warm to sit this morning.
Thanks for bringing your pet. The internet, as we know, is for cat videos. Thanks for participating. So were there any other points people wanted to make about the written reports that we received? Okay.
Andrew's hand is up.
Andrew.
Thanks. So I guess I have a question, since you pointed out that there was advice from the OMAC that was really a staff issue. What do you want me to do? Because that has consequences. I mean, if what we have to do is do a community consultation about every project that is proposed, the project planning procedures at the Internet Society are going to get about a year longer. We will be doing, 2 years out action plans.
So I'm not sure that the way I read it, and perhaps one thing we could do is maybe you, I, and the OMAC chairs could sit down and have a meeting as a short-term action. But the way I read it was they would like to be more involved, not necessarily that they wanted to be consulted in such a way as to add time to the process. That somewhat like the way I read the policy side of that was they wanted to know how they could amplify the policy positions once they were made, because they felt like the policy engagements were valuable. And so working with them to amplify them would be sort of a post facto engagement. Similarly, I was seeing this engagement as the action plans come to fruition, you get to a point in the action plan where you know what you're going to do, and then say, okay, we've established what the priorities are. We know what the staff activity is going to be. Now we're going to go to OMAC and say, this is what the staff activity is going to be. How can you amplify it and bring it to them as an action item rather than as a consultative step that prevents your action? And that's the way I was hoping it would go forward.
Luis, again. Yeah, I also will think like an invitation rather than a new duty. Yeah, just taking their willingness to participate more in the whole community. Thank you.
Yeah, that was my interpretation as well. And but I also think it might be useful for you and Ted just to have a meeting with the chairs just to confirm that. I did, at least didn't interpret it as wanting to add to a process.
Okay, so Andrew, are you happy for me to take the action item to set up a meeting for you, me, and the chairs, and we'll discuss this more in depth then, but with the idea that what we'll be offering is saying, okay, when the action plan has reached the point of having established what the staff activity is, we'll reach out to you to figure out how you can amplify.
Yeah.
Does that?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that probably works. Kevin, could you put the agenda back up again? So I fear that at this point, what you see in front of you is my terrible time planning, because it looks like by assigning 15 minutes to each one of the different committee reports, none of which took more than 3, we now have quite a lot of time. We're recovering back. So I guess I'm looking at this and am I reading it correctly that we would actually be able to recess now until tomorrow? Okay, so I guess I will ask the trustees if there's any other business for the good of the order, in the most obvious way, that if there was something you've been meaning to talk to us for an hour about, now is really your chance. Although at this point, I don't promise to keep Robert ever awake, since it's quite late where he is, and it would be an unannounced agenda item. But is there anything else for the good of the order?
I just wanted to thank you, Ted, for the way that you opened the session and what you had to say.
You're here.
Well, thank you for the support, and I'm sure we are all thinking along the same lines.
Along those lines, I also wanted to thank Andrew for what he has said as well over the last several weeks. And I think that the positions that the Internet Society has taken have been, frankly, extremely important. But Ted, I mean, the way you framed it was actually very poetic in parts and very moving. So thank you.
Yeah, also, I would like to comment that it sounds very good what you read. It will be nice to have a copy of that. It's very sensible and very politically correct words, and also to share that within the chapters there has been a discussion also about some positioning regarding the situation, and currently there is a formal statement coordinated by staff, which sounds also promising and supporting Andrew's position that he has expressed. So I think we are in the same in the same route, and we have the common positions, or even in organizations outside ISOC. They go into the same. I'm still worried about these people that claim that Russia should be expelled from or disconnected, which is a very radical and very improbable situation. But I think we have been providing the right position and the neutrality that we are supposed to have. Thank you.
Thanks. And when the chapters have done with their statement, please make sure that we have a chance to commend them on it. Thanks.
Sure.
Okay, with that, thank you all, and we'll see you tomorrow. For those of you in Europe, I'll remind you that there's a time change. So it will be a different time of day, although the same time according to Coordinated Universal Time. Thanks, see you tomorrow.
Thanks, everybody.